Hello, everybody. Welcome to Interpoint and all of our lessons and trainings on creating a powerful life that you want to live. Hi, my name is Michael Harris, and I'm going to be leading today's discussion with none other than Mr. Marc Gilson. He's at Centerpointe. If you don't know about Centerpointe, we'll talk about it sometime during the call. And he's Director of Client Services and really the chief product designer. He joined in '96, so that's been like 27 years. And again, I don't have time to get into all of this, but Marc is really, he's really an expert in neuro-auto technologies and other psychoacoustic therapies, especially as related to meditation and mindfulness. He has a special place in his heart for working with children and helping create mindfulness programs for children. And with that, again, Marc, I could go on and on here, but welcome to today's discussion.
Well, Michael, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to get a chance to talk with you and talk a little bit about Centerpointe and holosync and mindfulness and all that good stuff.
Excellent. Now, I know that you started at Centerpointe way back in '96, but I don't really know much of your history or whether you were meditating prior to that, or what led you to really committing your life to this path.
Yeah. That is a good question. I mean, meditation, I think for me, I didn't grow up with it, but I did get into it at kind of an early age, but I really didn't know I was meditating at the time. My dad was a meditator and very much a seeker, very much a deep thinker. Now, I didn't really grow up with dad in the household, but what he actually did was he taught me how to play chess. And dad was a chess master and he was a chess teacher. So, we kind of bonded over chess when I was a kid. And of course, I was really impatient being a kid. So my chess playing was pretty reckless, to put it mildly. So dad basically said, look, if you want to get better at this, you have to learn how to use your focus, how to use your mind. And that's when he started to show me how to slow down, how to breathe slowly and deliberately, and how to visualize. And, I didn't think of that as meditation. We didn't call it that, but really I kind of point to that as my first real experience with meditation. And then,
can I jump in there for a
moment?
moment?
Of course, you bet.
Because I think this is really important that I just heard you say that your dad just said, like breathe and do these different things. And I think our parents are really intuitive in that way. I know when I was a little kid, I was being chased by one of the neighborhood bullies, right?
Yeah.
So running up to the back door, and mom says, well, what's wrong? I'm 6, 7 years old. I said, well, Todd is chasing me. And she said, okay, just breathe.
Yeah.
Calm down and breathe. And like intuitively, she knew what to say. So
yeah, absolutely.
Like your father was similar, like somehow intuitively, he knew that was something, a tool, a technique that could help you.
Oh yeah. Well, and we could do a whole hour about breath work and the power of breath in terms of regulating our emotions and our focus and things. But yeah, you're exactly right. And so for me, that was where I guess I would point to, in terms of I mean, later in my teens and 20s, I started to practice, conventional forms of meditation more intentionally. And so, this was stuff like Zazen and Vipassana and things like that. And I got pretty dedicated to that for a while. And I took some meditation classes. And of course, I read a ton and I experimented with Qigong and with Reiki. Eventually, I became a Reiki master and did some teaching. And then later, sometime late 1980s, that's when I really came across neural audio technologies, or some people like to say psychoacoustic technologies. And this was in the form of things like light and sound devices and, binaural beat entrainment, which I became really, really fascinated with. I've always been kind of a sound person. I'm very responsive to different kinds of music, and I love sound design, vibration and tone and resonance and all of that. And so I really felt like, man, sound is powerful. These techniques hold so much potential. And then, of course, 1996 comes along, and I met a guy named Bill Harris, who I think you're familiar with, your brother, which is a whole story unto itself. And, it's funny because I'd heard of Bill through my work with light and sound machines, but I had no idea, first of all, that he was local to me, let alone, we'd end up working together for 22 years or something like that. But when I met him, I recognized we had one thing in common, which is that we both really believed in the power of sound, and we're both really interested in seeing how to get the benefits from long-term meditation, but by accelerating the process. And so by then I'd been using neurotech as a meditation tool for some time, and I was using it, Bill was creating it. And so when Bill introduced me to HoloSync, his own proprietary form of this technology that he'd been working with, at first I thought, oh boy, here we go. More psychoacoustic stuff, been there, done that. But then I really started looking deeper at what HoloSync was and how it really worked. And then I went, oh, okay, wait a minute. I think I know what this guy's doing. I think this guy's really onto something here.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
The binaural neuro beats, I'm not exactly all the technical names you call it, but didn't it come out through a Russian researcher? Kind of the idea of binaural beats?
Actually, it's traced back to a number of different people. I have a feeling you may be thinking of somebody that was very influential in the physics community that people, especially Bill, referred to, and that's Dr. Ilya Prigogine. Yes. Prigogine was not specifically working in binaural beat. As far as I know, he may not have even never heard the term. But because of his work in dissipative structures and in chaos theory, Bill used his work as a model for something that we call neural driving, which we can dive into a little deeper a little later if you want to. But the origins of binaural beat, people have different ideas about that, but most people think it really started with a paper in 1973, excuse me, in Scientific American by Dr. Gerald Oster from Mount Sinai Medical Center. And he was the first to say, to describe binaural beats, I won't say discover, but to explain how they really were working, how they actually altered brainwaves in the human brain. And so, of course, the scientific community kind of thought that was interesting, but it was the consciousness exploration people, right? The meditators who were like, wait a second, you mean to tell me we can alter brainwave states? We can get into an alpha state or a theta state or a delta state. We can induce sleep. We can replicate these brainwave patterns associated with deep meditation. We don't have to take drugs. We don't have to ingest anything. It's just sound can do this. And the answer is yes. And so that's what really, I think, lit the match for this little, industry that grew into.
Which leads me to another question, Mark.
Sure.
So you have these binaural beats embedded essentially underneath the music, and we're not conscious of these beats in there. So what's really the difference between somebody that might be sitting there in traditional meditation, or maybe walking down a trail with a calm mind, or introducing the binaural beats? What's really the difference between those?
You mean, yeah, like what's the difference between maybe like conventional meditation practices and doing something like this?
With the binaural beats embedded, as I understand it, you're able to go to different levels quicker, so to speak. Quicker may not be the right term, but
yeah, no, I mean that's true. Quicker and more precisely. It's a matter of controlling what would otherwise be somewhat randomized brain activity. Your brain is kind of it's almost an electrical organ, right? There's all these micro electrical fluctuations happening in our brains right now as we're sitting here talking. And the speed at which those neuroelectrical fluctuations are occurring can tell us something about what state we're in. So traditionally, a little faster states put you into a beta pattern, which is probably where we are right now. We're awake and we're talking to each other and we're aware of our surroundings and things. And then as those get slower and lower, you get into alpha, you get into theta, and we can talk about all that if you want to. But with binaural beat technology, the idea is to establish what Dr. Oster called the frequency following response, which is where the brain waves fall into lockstep with the audio stimulus, the binaural beat entrainment stimulus, and then can move the brain patterns up and down to or through virtually any given state you want.
So now you get that somewhat through sitting in regular meditation, but it's almost as if somebody that's never meditated before can use these meditation programs and maybe experience something somebody's been sitting for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, actually, Michael, because for Bill, for example, he started reading a lot, of course, as you probably know, about all the, the benefits of long-term meditation, but he's reading this from gurus and people who have basically dedicated, 40 years of their lives to meditating, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day. That's not practical in most of our lives. And Bill felt like he had some catching up to do. Most of us weren't born and raised to be meditators. In fact, most of us don't learn how to do it until later in life. And so Bill was looking for a way to not shortcut, but to speed that process up, to accelerate it. And, I'll tell you this, you might find this interesting. People sometimes say, well, holosync's great, but it's not real meditation. It's not traditional. And I get that perspective. It's technology enhanced meditation. We don't pretend that it isn't. I mean, that's the whole point, right? But my take on this has always been that one of the things about us as human beings is that we're tool makers. It's a defining characteristic of who we are. And you could, for example, think about transportation. So, if you and I want to get from New York to LA, well, we got a lot of choices, right? We could drive a car, we could take a train, we could ride our bicycles, or we could hop on a jet, and you could walk it, I guess. But I don't think too many people today would really consider walking the entire distance from New York to LA. So you ask, is riding a bus or taking the plane somehow cheating or shortcutting? I mean, you could argue that, but I think most people will opt for the fastest, most efficient means of transportation that's available to them if they want to go a long distance. And so for me, and for hundreds of thousands of other people over, 34 years or so, that's what holosync has been. It's been an accelerated form of transportation to speed up the results of meditation that might have taken you 40 years to see.
And that's really interesting, because as I grew up, I started practicing yoga, and I started practicing in 87. So I've been doing it for a long time and have multiple teaching certificates and all of that. And I find when I practice, a lot of practice, and other yoga practitioners that may be listening may experience this too. It's like, as an adult, we often live in the past or in the future, and yoga helps to bring us to live in the present. As does meditation, as does the meditation technology that you talk about and available through Centerpointe, helps us get to the present, so to speak. Does that make sense, Mark?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And with yoga, it's a very sort of proprioceptive, bodily, once you have that kind of bodily awareness, you're very much in the moment. And, I mean, likewise with, you can sort of think of meditation as a way to really ground yourself in that moment. For me, it's kind of what gives me my most, what I think of as my most authentic sense of being here, or what some people would call presence. But for Bill, and for a lot of people too, there's an expectation, a natural one, I think, that you don't do meditation or even like yoga, of course, just for a momentary experience, right? There are benefits that ripple out from that. And when it comes to using holosync, I mean, those benefits are numerous. I mean, I could do a whole hour on that by itself, but you want to see change, you want to see growth. The same way you want to see growth and change and improvement if you go to the gym and you work out. If you were only ever in shape while you were at the gym, you probably wouldn't bother to go. Right. So with holosync, it's getting into that deep meditative state, but also is about the changes and improvements in your happiness and your functioning the other 23 hours of your day as well.
Right. Now, explain the technology. I mean, I a little bit understand it. I don't understand it a lot, but there's some initial programs that are available that helps more the newer meditator, I'll call it. But
Mhm.
as you progress, there's deeper and deeper levels and programs, and the binaural beats, or as the different technology, the neurotechnology, it evolves along with the person practicing with the holosync program, right? There's like a dozen different levels or 13 levels. Or...
Yeah, you're talking about the core classic program that Bill first began designing and creating back in 1989. Well, 89 was when he first began offering it commercially. He'd been sort of beta testing it for 2 or 3, 4 years before that. But yeah, that's called the Holosync Solution Program, and that is the core classic heavy duty program. And I think we can sort of go back to a little bit of Prigogine. Ilya Prigogine was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. He worked in something called dissipative structures, which you don't have to get into that much, but think chaos theory, think thermodynamics. But basically what Prigogine said is that there are open systems and closed systems, and we are open systems. And what makes a human being an open system is that we take in stimulus and it creates a certain amount of entropy, or some people use the term chaos, but it's really just randomized energy within that open system. And an open system is smart enough in some way or another to reorganize all that chaos and grow and expand. And what Prigogine said, escape to a higher order, or what Bill said was reorganize to a higher level. And that's growth, and that's evolution, and that's change. And so that's what we're after with Holosync, especially with those levels. When you begin with the Holosync Solution Program, we call it an introductory level, but it's by itself, it's going to be more potent in terms of a stimulus than you'd ever get with any kind of conventional meditation. I'm not saying it's better, but I am saying it's different, it's stronger. Yeah. And so then you can move on into the next level and the next level. The point of all the levels is to gradually increase the stimulus that we're feeding that nervous system to create the next level of core level improvements and changes in that system or that person. And watch the growth unfold. And that's a beautiful part of it. So yeah, it's a very powerful series of soundtracks you can listen to over the course of many years if you want.
In our conversation today, I want to talk about a couple more things. And at the end, there is a special gift that people are going to receive. So yeah. I do want to mention that because I didn't mention that earlier. I also want to talk a little bit about kids and a little bit about trauma. Back in, it's been good 20, 25 years ago, I had a yoga studio in Portland at the time, and I worked a lot with the Portland School District on the mentally challenged kids. And I had a special program for them for several years with yoga, and we would sit as well. And most of these kids were multiple diagnoses, multiple meds. They would come in literally bouncing off the wall, and it took a couple of months for them to calm down. And then they would, instead of wanting to come in and do any yoga practice, they wanted to sit and meditate first. And I saw this incredible transformation with these kids through that practice. And I know, again, that working with kids and children is something that's special to you. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe the difference in meditating for kids and adults?
Yeah. Sure, absolutely, Michael. I should say most of the heavy duty Holosync stuff we don't necessarily recommend for children, but we do have a special program we developed that is called the Magical Wooded Path. And this was designed with a much lighter version of Holosync, so it's much gentler on the nervous system. But the idea was to help children learn the value of mindfulness, the value of stillness. I mean, I don't know about you, but I didn't, I learned about math, and I learned about science, and I learned about history, and I learned how to change a tire on a car and things
Yeah.
like that. But no one ever sat down with me and said, hey, Mark, how about we learn how to manage all those crazy emotions and thoughts and stuff that's going on in your head, and how to make healthy choices, and how to really deal with life when you run into some sort of problem. No one taught me that, and so a lot of kids don't understand the value. That's a great story that you told about those kids, because they're just sort of, it seems like, intuitively picking up on the value of like calming down, getting centered, getting grounded, getting in the moment. And that's a lesson I don't think many people learn. Trauma wise, we're not trauma doctors, of course, but we know that over 60% of us who've suffered trauma, and that's the majority of folks, unfortunately, that trauma was experienced in childhood. So, you got trauma from physical, sometimes sexual, sometimes emotional abuse. And of course, we all know about PTSD and the challenges of that. But we also have to remember trauma can come from neglect. It can come from the loss of a loved one. It can come from the loss of a job. Today, I mean, always, I suppose, but there's poverty, there's community or family violence, and war, and natural disasters, and all kinds of things that can create a sense of trauma. And there's a whole host of things we could get into about that. But I guess I would kind of finish this section just by saying, HoloSync, I don't want to say HoloSync is going to cure all your trauma, but anytime you can increase the resilience of the human nervous system, anytime you can help that system flush out and heal old, concretized, unresolved mental and emotional stuff, and anytime you can help someone separate themselves from a story of trauma that's holding them back, that's defining them for too long, not to mention all the improvements in the way the brain works, the brain chemistry that we now know changes for the better through mindfulness meditation. Well, you start adding all that up, and eventually you take that and you offer that to someone who's experienced trauma, whether a year ago or 30 or 40 years ago, and you're going to see dramatic improvement in most cases.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like the kids that I was working with, again, multiple diagnoses. I didn't want to know what the diagnoses were. I knew internally that their mind was bouncing around at 100 miles an hour or 10,000 miles, however fast.
Right.
And for them to begin to just sit and calm, and because their parents, their siblings, their friends, the school district had all labeled them in a certain way. And I did not want to label them at all like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to give them the space to allow their minds to be calm. And many of them ended up learning how to ride the bus, or learning how to climb mountains, or getting, small part-time jobs that they had never imagined they could do before, all by the calming of the mind, just by, sitting a little bit, bending a little bit in yoga and twisting. And that mind, and some of them, reduced the meds that they were taking.
Yeah.
So I mean, the transformation through the process of meditation and mindfulness is, endless almost.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you said it, and it's interesting. There are so many parallels between what you're doing and what we've experienced here. And I think too, even children aside, and various kinds of developmental challenges aside, meditation, I, I get this all the time. People say, well, meditation's hard. And, when you think about it, the easiest thing you could probably ask a human being to do is just sit down and don't do anything, right? And yet it's hard because we're not used to doing that. We don't understand the value of stillness. Sometimes we think stillness is laziness. Sometimes we think it's being unproductive. And, the way our egos work, the way our minds work, it's sort of like that, that inner toddler that always got to be doing something until they get tuckered out and fall asleep. And so meditation is hard. And so that's another reason why HoloSync is so helpful. is because it kind of takes that off your plate. You don't have to kind of discipline yourself or white knuckle your way through a meditation practice, or commit to 12 weeks of frustratingly sitting there wondering about your grocery shopping list or how to pay the bills on time or what's on TV later. Holosync takes all that off your plate for you, so you can just relax and settle into that deep meditative state.
So in some ways, when you use the HoloSync product, you're not really doing a technique other than you want to use headphones, you want to put the headphones on and just sit there and just start to become more present and just experience the 30, 40, 50-minute program that it might be, but you don't have to necessarily learn Vipassana or TM or some of these other forms. The technology does some of that work for you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, I mean, if you Google, different kinds of meditation, you're going to come up with the 7 main kinds of meditation, or the 12 main forms of meditation. And for me, not to overly simplify it, but traditional meditation practices anyway sort of boil down to 2 basic forms. And this is just my own opinion. But, you're talking about passive and active meditation. So passive meditation, you're simply sitting down calmly without engaging in any specific activities. Very Zen-like, it's very passive. And like I said, it's interesting to me because I think this passive approach is harder for most people somehow, because we're so used to doing stuff. But the active one is where you're engaged in your mantra recitation, things like that. And one is not better than another, but for Holosync, we tend to favor the passive meditation a little bit, because we just think the less you're doing and the more you're being, the better. And that's my take. Let the mind settle, stop stirring up the waters, and just let the water grow very still and quiet. So people will say, well, is Holosync passive or active? And in a way, I guess you could say it's a little bit of a hybrid, because like you said, you're technically doing something. You've got the headphones on, you're listening to the sounds, but that's it. Other than listening, you're not doing, you're just being, you're just sitting. And so this is sort of a less is more approach. So you can sit, you can count your breath if you want to, but you don't have to. And that's the beautiful part of that, is it really is about as easy as you can make it.
Yeah. And then that's what I like about it. And I don't know, maybe somewhere in the mid-90s was the first time that Bill gave me one of the early programs. And, I've used it off and on over the years. Sometimes I'm really dedicated to it, and sometimes I'm more dedicated to walking along the river, or whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah, whenever I'm using the technology, and I have my headphones right behind me back here, I really notice the difference pretty quickly. Now,
Yeah.
again, I practice yoga regularly, and I've been doing those calming practices, so to speak, for years, because my mind was all over the place too. I
Yeah.
needed to find some way to calm it down.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me into the next thing, where I'd like to really talk a little bit more about trauma.
Yeah.
And trauma is a pretty big buzzword right now. It was more about pain previously, 20, 30, 40 years ago, perhaps. And now, you got trauma-informed teachers and trauma-informed yoga teachers, and, a lot of this. And it's really, maybe the awareness around it has become greater.
Yeah.
And I heard you mention too about, early childhood, when we're younger, a lot of these things begin to get within us. Our parents are alcoholics, somebody's gone to jail, there's broken families, there's different types of physical, emotional, sexual abuse, financial issues, whatever it might be, that all cause trauma that often later in life, and this is shown through the ACE study as well, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, where we develop various back pain and migraines and multiple different types of diseases. Most hospitals nowadays say 90% of their admissions are stress related.
Yeah.
Disease, cancer, you name it, back. It's 90% stress related.
Yeah.
So the thing that fascinates me a lot about yoga and meditation and holosync is, now holosync is not a medically prescribed tool, so to speak, although some doctors will say, please sit and meditate.
Hmm.
Um, the power of meditation to help us release much of that trauma is well established now.
Yes.
And I would like it, Mark, if you could maybe talk a little bit more about, that the trauma and meditation and calming the mind and how it all
Yeah.
relates.
Oh, sure. Boy, it's such a huge topic. And, we recently came out with actually our second package of trauma-focused soundtracks. And something I think that you can very much relate to in the yoga world is, we find so many people who think of trauma as kind of a mental or emotional issue, and they forget that the impact it has on their bodies. And so they've got that, the stiff neck and the stiff shoulders and the tight jaw and the tightness around the eyes. And they think, if I can just get rid of this backache, then I'll feel better. And they don't always say, maybe if I go and look and heal some of this stuff from the past, the backache might begin to take care of itself. So with holosync, it is interesting because we have spent so many years talking about stress. It's such a powerful stress reliever, holosync is. And so people say, well, can holosync help with this? Can holosync help with my that? Can holosync help heal this? And I don't want to sort of, whitewash or generalize too much, but most of the time you can fill in the blank with almost any issue or problem or condition. And if you take and reduce the intensity of the stress, the mental and emotional and physical stress, and some would say spiritual stress that a person is coping with, there's almost always a correlative improvement in whatever else they're dealing with. That doesn't mean it's a cure, but once you remove stress, stress is going to exacerbate almost anything that you're dealing with. It's going to exacerbate your back pain, your heart condition, your diabetes, your high blood pressure. Stress isn't good for any of that stuff. So if you can reduce the stress, you often see improvements in these other conditions. Trauma is a little like that. You're right. This is not a medical approach to trauma. We're not offering a cure for trauma. But trauma is a form of unresolved mental and emotional material. It creates hyper arousal in the nervous system, hypervigilance. It can lead to heart problems. It can lead to obesity. It can lead to substance abuse challenges and alcoholism and all kinds of things like that. So if you improve a person's emotional resilience and their ability to manage their thoughts and feelings more effectively, if you reduce their stress levels, if you empower them to make more conscious, intentional choices rather than being so reactionary to everything, well, that is in effect a form of helping to heal not what happened maybe 25 years ago, but to heal all of the ripple effects that you've been dealing with in your life since then. And that is where our clients are seeing dramatic improvement in terms of healing trauma. And it's been remarkable. Some of the stories I don't even know if you'd believe, but we're just so happy that people are seeing that kind of benefit.
Yeah. And it's true. I think almost this more simple the solution is, the more that it works. Our bodies are not craving pharmaceuticals, so to speak.
Yeah.
We're not missing a pharmaceutical.
Right.
Much of what we do, when we start to bring the mind and the body back to its natural working order, a lot of these things go away. And there's an organization, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Mark, it's actually in Portland, it's called the PPDA. It's a Psychophysiological Disorders Association. And a friend of mine, Dr. David Clark, started it. He was a gastroenterologist out of Stanford growing up, associate director of ethics at OHSU. He started this organization because he realized that most gastro issues, as well as any other issue you can almost imagine, were stress related. And as you shifted your mindset and you became more mindful and your mind became calmer and maybe you meditated, is that oftentimes these ailments that were incurable for 20 years very quickly go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating work.
It really is. And you know, I want to say, you know, I'm not one, I've been in the personal growth industry a long time as you have. And so, you know, we both know there are some things out there that are the miracle cures and things like that. And I always take those things with a grain of salt. I consider myself a skeptic, not a cynic, but a skeptic. I need to see some proof. And so when we talk about these things, you know, we're this isn't stuff that, you know, we picked up on a Facebook post somewhere or something like that. You know, when I started working with Bill, you mentioned, you know, doctors advising meditation. I will tell you, this was 1996, right? And so meditation at that point was still kind of a little bit of an esoteric, you know, something gurus and new age years people like that did. And so, you know, doctors were very skeptical. Oh, meditation, that's not going to help you. You know, you need a prescription, you know, you need an operation. And sometimes maybe you do. But I've noticed over the years, having been in the position that I've been in, which is beautiful because I get to hear so much from clients and people using it. Now the difference is we'll get a call from a client who goes, yeah, my doctor said I needed to learn to meditate and suggested I get Holosync because, you know, he says my blood pressure is high and I'm not responding that well to medication, or, you know, I've got some problems with my back, some chronic pain issues. Do you have anything for that? And well, we do. And so we're not out curing diseases, but we are helping the system, the human system, become healthier and more resilient and stronger in the face of stress. And that includes stress that comes from different kinds of ailments. So these changes, I mean, mindfulness meditation, Michael, as you know, today it's practiced in the boardrooms, it's practiced by professional athletes, it's practiced by the military. You know, this isn't some esoteric thing anymore. And that's because there's been study after study about the benefits, proven benefits of mindfulness practices. And so when we have Holosync, a tool that can accelerate that, I mean, that makes a lot of people very happy.
You know, you're right. And, you know, really many, if not most, top performers in the world, whether they're in a professional capacity, a business capacity, an athletic capacity, they're doing some type of mindfulness, yoga, meditation, something.
Yeah, or all of the above, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
no relation. I don't remember his first name. Tom Harris, I believe it was. It may not have been Tom. He was a newscaster for NBC News, and he had an emotional breakdown on air.
Mm,
Know about meditation, started meditating, and it changed everything for him.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
again, it brings it back to the natural working order. So our minds in today's world, especially, are scattered so much.
Oh, yeah.
By being still, by doing these practices, by perhaps doing Holosync, is our minds start to calm down, so then we can perform better in our life.
Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing about that, because you made me think of this. You know, I don't know if you've read the book Stolen Focus. The author's name escapes me right now. Focus. But you know, you're right that our minds are so scattered and they're being stolen, and our attention is really our most valuable mental resource. You know, if I have your attention, I have a lot of power over you. And we sometimes let our attention get stolen away from us by digital media and social media and TV and movies and, you know, whatever else, video games, what have you. And so that ability to know that at any time, even though you've got all this stuff coming at you all day long, if you live in the modern world like most of us do, you do have that ability to reclaim that and rebalance that. And that can be through doing a yoga session, or it can be through doing, you know, 15 minutes with Holosync or whatever it is. And it just brings you right back, like you said, to that natural state where you feel most yourself.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Mark, we're really already at the end of our time today.
Oh boy, okay.
Yeah,
Good,
I'd
that's all right.
love to bring you back again sometime because there's so many different rabbit holes that we can go down
Oh yeah, yeah.
and talk about that. So I hope that we can do this again. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I mentioned this about halfway through, is that you have some special 16-minute meditation. Is that correct?
Boy, do we. Yes, we do have a special gift and we want to share it with all of our viewers, Michael. I'm really pleased we can do this. So as a thank you for joining us today, here at Centerpointe, we wanted to share an incredible 16-minute guided meditation by the founder of Centerpointe, the creator of HoloSync, and Michael's brother, Bill Harris. Now, I want to mention this soundtrack has been remastered completely very recently. So now it includes this beautiful musical background. And most importantly, it also includes HoloSync. And to use it, you just grab your earbuds, your headphones, you sit down and you listen. Bill did such an incredible job with this meditation. And once we remastered it, we all just sat around and went, wow, this is just gorgeous. This is perfect for relaxation, for the kind of stress relief that we're talking about. You know, if you've had one of those days, you know, you just pop this on and sit back and you're in a much better headspace. So Michael, I'll go ahead and give the link out, and then I think this will appear on screen and elsewhere too, right?
Yeah, it should be on screen and also somewhere around this recording as well. You should see a link.
Okay, good. But I'll read it out to you. I'll read it and then I'll spell it for you real quick. It's myholosync.com/16 min meditation. So that's myholosync.com, myholosync.com, with a /16 MEDMEDIATATION, 16 min meditation. So please do check that out. Let us know what you think of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, again for being here. And let's do this again and find some other areas that we can dive into as well.
Oh, we've got plenty of areas. Yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Take care now.